Sometimes the loneliest man is the one who's convinced himself he doesn't need anyone at all. Caleb Stone had spent 7 winters alone in the Wyoming mountains, and he'd made peace with it, or so he told himself. When he agreed to marry a woman through letters, it was purely practical. 2 strangers sharing a cabin to survive the frontier. No love, no expectations, just an arrangement. She needed shelter, he needed help. Simple as that. But when he lifted her veil in that small timber chapel, everything changed. The woman standing before him hadn't come out of desperation, she'd come with hope. What happens when a heart you thought was frozen suddenly begins to thaw? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at the edge of a pine forest where the mountains rose like ancient guardians against the Wyoming sky. Caleb Stone had built it with his own hands 8 years ago, when he still believed in futures and possibilities. Now it was just shelter. 4 walls, a stone fireplace, a roof that kept the snow out. Nothing more than what a man needed to survive. He stood at the window that morning, watching the sun break over the peaks. 42 years old, though the mirror suggested older. The mountains did that to a man. His hands were calloused and scarred from axe work and trap lines. His beard had more grey than brown now, and his eyes, well, they'd seen things he preferred not to remember. The bundle of letters sat on the rough-hewn table behind him, 12 of them tied with a piece of twine he'd used to secure his trap lines. He hadn't meant to keep them that way, all together like something precious. They were just correspondence, practical communication between 2 people making a practical arrangement. He turned from the window and picked up the bundle, feeling the weight of paper and ink and carefully chosen words. The first letter had arrived 6 months ago, forwarded through the general store in town. A woman named Emma Carlisle, writing from Pennsylvania. She'd seen his notice in the matrimonial newspaper, one of those publications that connected frontier men with women seeking new lives out west. Caleb hadn't wanted to place that notice. It was Samuel Carter, the storekeeper, who'd finally worn him down. "You can't spend another winter alone up there, Caleb. It's not right. Man needs help. And there's no shame in admitting it." There was shame in it, though. Shame in admitting that 7 winters of solitude had nearly broken something in him. Shame in confessing that the isolation he'd chosen as protection had become a prison. But Samuel was right about the practical matters. The cabin needed work he couldn't manage alone. The garden plot he'd neglected for years needed tending, and the silence, the endless, crushing silence, was louder than any storm. So he'd placed the notice. Brief and honest. Mountain man 42 seeks practical wife for frontier life. Hard work, harsh winters, simple living. No false promises. Emma's first letter had been equally direct. She was 30 years old, unmarried, and seeking a new beginning. She could cook, sew, tend a garden, and manage a household. She asked for honesty and respect, nothing more. She made no mention of love or romance, which suited Caleb just fine. Their correspondence had continued through the winter, 12 letters exchanged over 5 months, each one carefully composed. They discussed practical matters, mostly what supplies she should bring, what the winters were truly like, what he could offer and what he couldn't. But between the practical lines, Caleb had sensed something else, a loneliness that matched his own, a weariness with whatever life she was leaving behind. He'd written once, in his 6th letter, "I won't pretend this will be easy. The mountains are beautiful, but they're hard. I'm not a man who speaks much, and I've been alone long enough that I've forgotten how to be otherwise. I can promise you shelter and safety and honest work. I can't promise you happiness." Her response had been simple. "I'm not looking for promises, Mr. Stone. I'm looking for a chance. Sometimes that's enough." Now the day had come. He'd ridden down from the mountain before dawn, his horse picking its way along the familiar trail. The wedding was set for 10 o'clock at the small timber chapel on the edge of town. Reverend Matthews would officiate. Samuel and his wife Martha would stand as witnesses. Then Caleb would bring his new wife back up the mountain to begin their arrangement. He'd spent the previous week preparing the cabin. He cleaned thoroughly, something he hadn't bothered with in years. He'd repaired the shutters, chinked gaps in the walls, and built a privacy screen for one corner where Emma could have some space of her own. He'd even brought in wildflowers, though he'd felt foolish doing it. This wasn't a romantic occasion. It was a transaction, an arrangement between two practical people. The town of Ironwood was already stirring when Caleb arrived. He tied his horse outside the general store and nodded to the few people who greeted him. Most folks here knew him, or knew of him. The quiet mountain man who came down once a month for supplies and rarely spoke more than necessary. Martha Carter found him standing outside the chapel an hour before the ceremony. She was a round, warm woman in her 50s who'd tried for years to draw Caleb into the community. She arrived last night on the stage, Martha said, studying his face. She's staying at the boarding house. Haven't met her yet, but Mrs. Henderson says she's a genteel sort. Quiet, polite. Caleb nodded, unsure what to say to that. You nervous? Martha asked, her voice gentler. No, he said. Then more honestly, maybe. This is just an arrangement, Martha, nothing to be nervous about. Martha's expression softened with something like pity. Oh, Caleb, you keep telling yourself that. Reverend Matthews was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a quiet manner that Caleb appreciated. They'd known each other for years, ever since Caleb first came to these mountains. The Reverend had presided over another wedding once, years ago, when Caleb had been a different man. He didn't mention it now, and Caleb was grateful. She seems like a good woman, the Reverend said as they waited in the small chapel. I spoke with her briefly this morning. There's strength in her, Caleb, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Caleb looked around the chapel. Simple wooden pews, a plain altar, windows that let in the mountain light. The last time he'd stood here, he'd been 28 years old and full of foolish hope. That was before the fever took his young wife and their unborn child, before he'd learned that hope was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. This is different, he said, more to himself than the Reverend. This is just practical. Of course, Reverend Matthews said, but his eyes suggested he knew better. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door at the back of the chapel opened. Caleb turned, his heart doing something strange in his chest, something he didn't want to examine too closely. Samuel and Martha entered first, taking their places. Then Emma Carlyle stepped through the door, and Caleb's carefully constructed expectations began to crumble. She wore a simple grey dress, modest and well-made. A veil covered her face, the lace worn but carefully mended. She carried no flowers, no decoration. Everything about her presentation matched the practical tone of their letters. She walked down the short aisle with steady steps, her posture straight but not stiff. She was smaller than he'd imagined, delicate, almost. How would someone so slight manage the hard work of mountain life? But there was something in the way she moved, a determination that spoke of inner steel. She reached the altar and stood beside him. Through the veil, he could make out only the vaguest impression of her features. His hands felt too large, too rough. He clasped them behind his back. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony with familiar words about marriage and commitment and the covenant being entered. Caleb barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the woman beside him, this stranger who'd agreed to share his life for purely practical reasons. When the moment came, the Reverend nodded to him. This was it, the moment that would make their arrangement real and binding. Caleb reached up with hands that had faced down wolves and winter storms without trembling and found them unsteady now. He lifted the veil. The world stopped. Emma Carlyle looked up at him with eyes the color of summer grass, deep and clear and filled with something that made his breath catch. Her face was lovely in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty. It was the openness in her expression, the gentle strength in her features, the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. But it was her eyes that undid him. They held hope, real, genuine, undisguised hope. This woman hadn't come seeking mere survival. She hadn't come resigned to a loveless arrangement. She'd come believing in possibilities, in chances, in futures that men like him had stopped imagining years ago. Caleb felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built that he thought was permanent. He tried to look away, to maintain the careful distance he'd planned, but he couldn't. Her gaze held his, and in that moment, every careful plan he'd made dissolved like snow in spring sun. "Caleb Stone," Reverend Matthews said, his voice seeming to come from far away, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" He should have answered quickly, practically, moving through the ceremony as planned. Instead, he stood there, looking into Emma's hopeful eyes, feeling his entire life shift beneath his feet. "I do," he finally said, and the words felt like a beginning rather than a transaction. Emma's voice was soft when she spoke her vows, but it carried through the small chapel with quiet certainty. "I do." The Reverend smiled, clearly pleased with what he was witnessing. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb hadn't thought about this part. In all his practical planning, he'd somehow failed to consider this traditional moment. He looked at Emma, saw a faint blush color her cheeks, and felt his own face grow warm. He leaned down, she was nearly a foot shorter than him, and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. It was meant to be nothing, a formality. But the softness of that momentary touch sent something through him he hadn't felt in years, and when he pulled back, he saw in her eyes that she'd felt it too. Martha was crying happy tears. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. Reverend Matthews had them sign the marriage certificate, making it legal and binding. Emma's handwriting was neat and careful. Caleb's own signature looked rough beside it, the letters formed by a hand more accustomed to axe handles than pen and ink. And then it was done. Emma Carlyle was now Emma Stone, his wife. They accepted brief congratulations from the small gathering. A few townspeople had quietly slipped into the back pews to witness the ceremony. Then Caleb retrieved Emma's trunk from the boarding house and secured it to his horse. She had only the one trunk, which spoke to either careful packing or a life left behind with little attachment. "Ready?" he asked, and realized he had no idea what to call her. Mrs. Stone seemed too formal. Emma seemed too familiar for a woman he'd just met. "Yes," she said simply, solving nothing. He helped her mount his horse. She rode well, he noticed, another thing she hadn't mentioned in her letters. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. She stiffened slightly at the nearness, then gradually relaxed against him as they started up the mountain trail. They rode in silence for the first hour. Caleb tried to think of something to say, some way to begin a conversation with this woman who was now his wife. But everything that came to mind seemed either too trivial or too weighty for the moment. So he said nothing, and she seemed content with the quiet. The trail wound upward through pine forest, following a creek that ran silver in the morning light. Wildflowers dotted the meadows they passed, and once they saw a deer watching them from the tree line. Emma made a small sound of delight at that, and Caleb felt an unexpected warmth at her reaction. "It's beautiful," she said finally, breaking their silence. "Your letters didn't do it justice." "Hard to describe," Caleb said. "Some things you have to see." "Yes," she agreed. Then after a pause, "Thank you for being honest in your letters about what to expect." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Another silence fell, but this one felt different, charged somehow. Emma shifted slightly in the saddle, and Caleb became acutely aware of her warmth against him, the faint scent of lavender from her hair, the way she fit perfectly within the circle of his arms. This was not part of the plan. The plan was simple coexistence, two people sharing space for practical purposes. Not this awareness, this pull towards someone he'd only just met. "Your letters were honest too," he said, surprising himself. "I appreciated that." "Were they?" Emma's voice held an odd note. "I tried to be, but I suppose we all present ourselves in the best light when we're writing to strangers." There was something beneath her words, something he couldn't quite grasp. Before he could pursue it, they rounded a bend, and the cabin came into view. Emma drew in a sharp breath. Oh, Caleb felt a surge of defensive pride. The cabin wasn't much, but he'd built it solid and true. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it keeps the weather out." "It's perfect," Emma said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised him. "It looks like a home." No one had called it that in years. To Caleb, it had been shelter, sanctuary, prison, but not a home. Homes had warmth and life and laughter. His cabin had only silence and shadows. He dismounted and helped Emma down, his hands spanning her waist. She was light as a bird, and again he wondered how someone so delicate would manage the harsh mountain life. But when she looked up at him, there was nothing fragile in her expression. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me this chance." She held his gaze for a long moment, and Caleb saw again that hope, that belief in possibilities. It frightened him more than any bear he'd ever faced. He stepped back, breaking the moment. "I'll get your trunk." Inside, the cabin looked different than when he'd left that morning. The wild flowers he'd awkwardly arranged now seemed presumptuous. The privacy screen he'd built looked flimsy and inadequate. Everything felt too rough, too crude for this woman who carried herself with such quiet grace. Emma stepped through the door and stopped, taking it all in. The single room with its stone fireplace, the rough furniture he'd built himself, the shelves holding his few possessions, the narrow bed in one corner, the privacy screen he'd erected in another, the table with two chairs, the kitchen area with its simple cookstove. "I know it's not," he began. "Wildflowers," Emma said, moving toward the table where his awkward bouquet sat in a tin cup. She touched them gently, a smile transforming her face. "You brought in wildflowers." "Seemed like something to do," Caleb muttered, feeling foolish. "It's lovely." She turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes. "No one has ever picked flowers for me before." The simple statement hit him harder than it should have. What kind of life had she lived that such a small gesture moved her to tears? He wanted to ask, but couldn't find the words. "I'll bring in your trunk," he said instead, and escaped outside. When he returned with the heavy trunk, Emma had removed her veil and was exploring the cabin with careful interest. She'd found the privacy screen and stood before it, one hand resting on the frame he'd built. "You made this for me," she said. "Not a question. Figured you'd want some privacy." "It's not much. It's thoughtful." She turned to face him, and something in her expression made his throat tight. "You said in your letters that you'd forgotten how to be with people. But you remembered this. That matters, Caleb." The use of his given name, spoken in her soft voice, did something to him. He set down her trunk more heavily than necessary. "I'll leave you to settle in. Get yourself arranged however you like. I've got work to do outside." He was retreating again, and he knew it, but Emma's presence filled the cabin in ways he hadn't anticipated. Every careful wall he'd built, every defense he'd erected over 7 years of solitude, felt suddenly paper-thin. "Caleb," she said as he reached the door. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "I meant what I wrote in my letters," Emma said quietly, "about wanting a chance at a new life. But I need you to understand something." Now he did turn, wary. "What's that?" Emma took a breath, and he saw her gathering courage. "I didn't come here just to survive. I didn't travel all this way to simply share a roof with a stranger and call it enough. I came here hoping—" She faltered, then pushed forward. "I came here hoping to build something real, a real marriage, a real life, maybe even—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The word hung between them anyway. Love. Caleb felt something close to panic. That wasn't the arrangement. I know. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. But that was your arrangement, Caleb, not mine. I agreed to your terms because it was the only way to get here. But now that I'm here, you need to know the truth. I came with hope in my heart, and I won't apologize for it. Hope is dangerous, he said, the words rough. Hope gets you hurt. So does fear, Emma replied. And I think fear has hurt you enough already. The accuracy of that statement left him speechless. She saw too much, this woman, understood too much. He'd expected someone practical and resigned, someone who'd keep her distance as he kept his. Instead, he'd gotten someone who saw through his carefully maintained walls and wasn't afraid to say so. I've got work to do, he said again, and this time he did leave, closing the door firmly behind him. Outside, he stood for a long moment, breathing hard. The mountain air usually calmed him, but not today. Today, everything felt wrong and right at the same time, turned upside down by a woman with green eyes and too much hope. He'd thought he was getting a practical arrangement, a housekeeper, essentially. Someone to share the work and the space, but nothing more. He'd thought he could keep his heart locked away, safe from any possibility of loss or pain. But Emma hadn't agreed to that at all. She'd come here with different expectations entirely, and now he was bound to her by law and vow, bound to a woman who wanted things he'd sworn never to risk again. Inside the cabin, he could hear her moving about, unpacking her trunk. The sounds of her presence changed everything. The cabin was no longer his refuge, his protected space. It was now shared, and with that sharing came vulnerability he wasn't prepared for. Caleb walked to the edge of the clearing, looking out at the mountains that had been his only companions for so long. They stood unchanged, eternal, indifferent to human struggles. He'd found comfort in that indifference once. But now, for the first time in 7 years, he wondered if indifference was just another word for loneliness. Behind him, smoke began to rise from the cabin's chimney. Emma was building up the fire, making herself at home, making it a home, perhaps, in ways he'd forgotten were possible. And Caleb Stone, who'd thought himself beyond fear, discovered he was terrified of exactly that possibility. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, each day bringing a bit more warmth, a bit more green. The snow retreated up the peaks, and wildflowers began to appear in the meadows. Emma spent hours working on her garden plot, clearing ground that Caleb had neglected for years, turning soil, planning what she'd plant. Caleb helped her, though he pretended it was merely practical. The garden would provide food for the winter, after all. It had nothing to do with the way Emma's face lit up when she talked about growing vegetables and herbs, or the way she hummed while she worked, or how right it felt to work beside her in the sun. Things between them had changed since the night of the storm, though Caleb couldn't have said exactly how. They spoke more easily now. Emma touched him casually, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing his as she passed him his coffee cup, and he no longer flinched away from it. Some nights they sat together by the fire, Emma reading aloud from one of the few books she'd brought while Caleb carved small pieces of wood, his hands needing something to do. He'd been carving more lately, small things mostly. A spoon for the kitchen, a button to replace one Emma had lost. And something else, something he worked on only when she wasn't looking. A small bird, wings spread, as if about to take flight. He wasn't sure why he was making it, only that his hands wanted to create something for her. One afternoon, Emma was organizing the shelves when she found something wrapped in old cloth at the back. She pulled it out carefully, and Caleb's stomach dropped when he saw what it was. A pocket watch. Silver, tarnished now, but still beautiful. The chain was broken, and the watch itself had stopped years ago, frozen at 3:47. "What's this?" Emma asked, turning it over in her hands. Caleb crossed the cabin and gently took it from her. "My father's watch. He gave it to me before he died." "It's beautiful," Emma said, studying his face. "Why is it hidden away?" "It stopped," Caleb said simply. Day my wife died, I was holding her hand, and I heard the watch fall from my vest pocket. When I picked it up later, it had stopped at the exact moment she—" He couldn't finish. Emma's hand covered his. "You kept it all these years? Couldn't seem to throw it away? Couldn't seem to fix it either?" He set the watch on the table between them. "It's just been here. Stopped, like everything else in my life was stopped." "Was?" Emma asked softly, catching the past tense. Caleb met her eyes. "I'm beginning to think maybe time doesn't have to stay frozen." Emma picked up the watch again, examining it more closely. "The mechanism looks intact. Just needs cleaning and maybe a new part or two. Samuel Carter in town, doesn't he know something about watches?" "He does," Caleb admitted. "Fixed a few over the years." "Then we should take it to him," Emma said. "Get it working again." The suggestion felt significant somehow, weighted with meaning beyond just repairing a timepiece. Emma seemed to understand this. She held the watch out to him, waiting. Caleb took it, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. For 7 years, this broken watch had been a fitting symbol: time stopped, life frozen, nothing moving forward. But maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time to let time move again. "We'll go to town next week," he said, "when we need supplies." Emma smiled, and Caleb felt something warm unfold in his chest. The trip to town came on a Saturday. They rode together, Emma seated in front of Caleb on his horse, and he found he no longer minded the closeness. In fact, he welcomed it, the way she leaned back against him, the trust implicit in her posture. Ironwood was busy that morning, Saturday being market day. Caleb noticed the looks they received, the speculation and curiosity. He'd been a solitary figure for so long that his appearance with a wife was causing quite a stir. Martha Carter descended on them immediately. "Emma, how wonderful to see you again. How are you settling in? Is Caleb treating you well?" "Very well," Emma said warmly. "The cabin is lovely, and the mountains are even more beautiful than I imagined." "She's being kind," Caleb said gruffly. "Cabin's rough. Cabin is home," Emma corrected gently, and her hand found his. Martha beamed at them. "Oh, I'm so pleased. I hoped well. Samuel's inside if you need to see him." "Caleb." They found Samuel behind the counter, sorting nails. His eyebrows rose when he saw them together, clearly noting the easy way Emma stood close to Caleb, the way their hands were linked. "Well now," Samuel said, grinning. "Look at you two. Marriage seems to be agreeing with you, Caleb." "It's tolerable," Caleb said, but he couldn't quite suppress the small smile that tugged at his mouth. Emma laughed outright. "He means to say he's happy, Samuel. He's just forgotten how to admit such things." "I can speak for myself," Caleb protested, but there was no heat in it. "Then speak," Emma challenged, her eyes dancing. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd invaded his life and his carefully constructed walls with her gentle persistence and relentless hope. "Fine," he said. "It's more than tolerable. She's your—" He struggled with the words, unused to voicing such things. "You make it better. Being here, everything's better with you in it." Emma's smile could have lit the whole store. She squeezed his hand, and Caleb felt absurdly pleased with himself for putting that look on her face. Samuel cleared his throat, looking touched. "Well, that's fine to hear, Caleb, real fine. Now, what can I do for you folks today?" Caleb pulled out the pocket watch. "Was hoping you might look at this, see if it can be fixed." Samuel took the watch carefully, understanding immediately its significance. He'd known Caleb long enough to know the story behind it. "I can certainly try. Might take a week or two to get any parts I need." "That's fine," Caleb said. "No hurry." But there was hurry, he realized. A sense of time moving, of life continuing forward instead of staying frozen. Emma had done that. She'd taken his stopped, stagnant existence and set it in motion again. While Samuel examined the watch, Emma wandered the store, exclaiming over various items. Caleb watched her, noting the way other townspeople watched her too with warmth and welcome. She had a gift for connection, for making people feel seen and valued. Several women engaged her in conversation, and Caleb saw how easily she fit into this small community, how naturally she belonged. She caught him watching and smiled, mouthing, "I'm fine." When he moved toward her, he stopped, realizing she didn't need his constant hovering. She was capable and confident, making her own place here. "She's good for you," Samuel said quietly, appearing at Caleb's elbow. "Real good. Anyone can see it." "I know," Caleb admitted. "Scares me sometimes how much better things are with her here." "Because you're afraid of losing it," Samuel guessed. "But Caleb, you can't live your life afraid of loss. That's not living. That's just waiting to die." Emma had said something similar, Caleb remembered. Maybe they were both right. Maybe fear wasn't protection at all. Maybe it was just another kind of prison. "I'm trying," Caleb said. "To be less afraid, I mean. To let her in." "I can tell," Samuel said. "You're different than you were even a month ago. More alive, somehow. That's her doing, and it's good to see." They completed their business and prepared to leave. Emma had purchased seeds for her garden and some fabric for new curtains. Small domestic purchases that spoke of putting down roots, of making a life rather than just existing. As they rode back up the mountain, Emma leaned against him and sighed contentedly. "That was nice. I like your town." "Our town," Caleb corrected. "It's yours too now." "Our town," Emma repeated, clearly pleased. I like the sound of that. Caleb did too. He liked the sound of ours in general, our cabin, our garden, our life. Possessives that spoke of partnership, of sharing, of building something together. The carved bird was nearly finished. He worked on it that night, while Emma read by firelight, and for the first time he didn't hide what he was doing. "What are you making?" Emma asked, setting down her book. "A bird," Caleb said, holding it up. "For you. If you want it." Emma crossed to him and took the small carving carefully. Her fingers traced the delicate wings, the careful detail of feathers. "It's beautiful, Caleb. How long have you been working on this?" "Couple weeks," he admitted. "Little bit at a time." "It's perfect," Emma whispered. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "No one's ever made something just for me before." "Then they were fools," Caleb said gruffly. Emma laughed and cried at the same time and kissed him soundly. And Caleb, who'd spent 7 years convinced his heart was dead, felt it beating strong and sure, brought back to life by a woman with gentle hands and steadfast hope. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to their lives that felt natural, almost easy. Caleb no longer counted the days or marked time by his solitude. Instead, he measured life in moments, shared morning coffee together, Emma's laughter at something he'd said, the comfortable silence of working side by side. Emma's garden plot had transformed from bare ground to neat rows of planted vegetables and herbs. She'd marked each row with small wooden stakes, her careful handwriting identifying what grew where. Caleb had helped her build a fence to keep out deer and rabbits, and together they'd hauled water from the creek to give the young plants their start. One evening, Emma knelt among the rows, carefully tending the emerging seedlings. Caleb sat nearby on a stump he'd placed there for just this purpose, watching her work. The late afternoon sun caught in her hair, turning it gold, and her face held an expression of peaceful contentment that made his chest tight. "You were right about this," Emma said without looking up. "The soil here is good, rich. Everything's growing so well." "You have a gift for it," Caleb observed, "making things grow." Emma did look up then, a smile playing at her lips. "Are we talking about the garden, Caleb?" He felt his face warm. "Maybe not just the garden." She laughed, that sound he'd come to treasure, and returned to her work. After a moment, she spoke again, her tone more serious. "Can I tell you something?" "Always. When I decided to come here, To answer your notice, I was running from something." Emma sat back on her heels, absently brushing dirt from her hands. Not just seeking a new life, actually running from an old one. Caleb tensed, sensing this was important. "What were you running from?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words. "There was a man back in Pennsylvania, Harrison Blackwood, wealthy, influential. He decided he wanted to marry me, and he's not a man accustomed to hearing no." "Did you tell him no?" "Many times." Emma's voice hardened. "But he wouldn't accept it. He had my father's blessing, my father owed him money, and he seemed to think that gave him the right to me. He became persistent, then pushy, then threatening. So I left. I took what I could carry and I ran as far west as I could get." Caleb felt anger stirring, hot and protective. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," Emma said, "but he made it clear that he would if I didn't comply. He said no woman refused Harrison Blackwood and got away with it." She met Caleb's eyes. "When I saw your notice, it felt like providence. A way to truly escape, to be legally bound to someone else so he couldn't claim me." "That's why you agreed so quickly," Caleb said, understanding dawning. "Why you were willing to marry a stranger." "Partly," Emma admitted, "but not entirely. Your letters, there was something in them, Caleb, an honesty, a loneliness that matched my own. I thought, even if it was just an arrangement, at least it would be with someone who was honest about what they wanted, someone who wouldn't try to own me." "I would never." "I know," Emma said quickly. "I knew it from your first letter. You were asking for a partner, not a possession. That's rare, Caleb, rarer than you might think." Caleb moved to sit beside her in the dirt, not caring about his clothes. "This Harrison, you think he's still looking for you?" "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "I covered my tracks as well as I could, changed coaches 3 times, used my mother's maiden name at first, stayed in different towns before I finally saw your notice. But he's a persistent man, and he has resources. I've been watching for any sign, any word, but so far nothing. If he comes here," Caleb said, his voice low and serious, "he'll find himself facing more than he bargained for. You're my wife now. That means something." Emma's hand found his. "It means everything," she said softly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you all along. This isn't just an arrangement anymore, Caleb. Not for me. Somewhere between those letters and this garden and every moment we've shared, it became real. You became real to me." Caleb turned her hand in his, studying the calluses she'd developed from work, the dirt under her nails from the garden. These were hands that worked hard, that created and nurtured and held. These were hands he'd come to depend on, to look for, to need. "It's real for me too," he admitted, "snuck up on me. I kept trying to keep my distance, to protect myself. But you wouldn't let me. You just kept being there, being patient, being," he struggled for the word. "Stubborn?" Emma suggested with a smile. "I was going to say brave," Caleb said. "It took courage to keep reaching out to someone who kept pulling away, to keep hoping when I gave you so little reason to." "You gave me more than you knew," Emma said. "Every small thing you did, the wildflowers, the privacy screen, the carved bird. You kept showing me that you cared, even when you were trying to convince yourself you didn't." They sat together in the garden as the sun sank lower, their hands linked, their shoulders touching. Around them, Emma's plants grew toward the light, reaching upward the way she'd taught Caleb to reach toward possibility instead of retreating into fear. "The watch should be ready soon," Caleb said after a while. "Samuel said maybe next week." "I'm glad," Emma said. "It's time to move forward again. For both of us. For all of us," Caleb corrected, and placed his free hand on her belly in a gesture that was more hope than certainty. Emma's breath caught. "Caleb, I know it's early to say," he said quickly. "Maybe too early to hope for, but I find myself hoping anyway, for futures, for possibilities, for everything I thought I'd lost the right to want." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then hope," she said. "Hope with me. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." They stayed in the garden until the stars began to emerge, two people who'd found each other through loneliness and letters, who'd built something real from the careful words of strangers, who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be known. And above them, the mountains stood witness, eternal and unchanging, as life and love found their way even in the hardest places. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early summer, carried by a traveling peddler who'd stopped at the cabin to offer his wares. Emma had been hanging laundry when the man approached, and Caleb had been working on the roof, replacing shingles damaged by winter storms. "Mail for Mrs. Emma Stone," the peddler said, handing over an envelope along with his sales pitch. "Came through the Ironwood post office. They asked me to deliver it, seeing as I was headed this way." Caleb climbed down from the roof, noting the way Emma's face had gone pale at the sight of the envelope. Her hands trembled as she took it. "That'll be 2 bits for the delivery," the peddler said cheerfully, oblivious to the sudden tension. Caleb paid him and sent him on his way, then turned to Emma. She stood frozen, staring at the envelope as if it were a snake about to strike. "Emma?" He moved to her side. "What is it?" "The handwriting," she whispered. "I know this handwriting." She turned the envelope over, and Caleb saw what had frightened her, a wax seal bearing an ornate letter B. Emma's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. "Let me," Caleb said gently, taking the letter from her. He broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. The words were written in an elegant, masculine hand. "My dearest Emma," Caleb read aloud, his voice growing harder with each word. "How disappointed I was to discover your departure from Philadelphia. Did you truly believe you could hide from me? That I would simply accept your rejection and move on? You underestimate both my determination and my resources. I know where you are, Emma. I know about your supposed marriage to some mountain man in Wyoming territory. It changes nothing. You belong to me, and I will have what is mine. Expect me within the month. We have much to discuss about your future, our future. Yours eternally, Harrison Blackwood." Emma made a sound like a wounded animal and sat down hard on the ground, all the color drained from her face. Caleb knelt beside her, his mind racing with anger and calculation. "How did he find me?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "I was so careful." Caleb helped her to her feet and guided her inside the cabin. She moved like someone in a dream, her body present but her mind somewhere far away, trapped in fear. He settled her in a chair by the fire, though the day was warm. She was shivering, and poured her a cup of water. "Drink," he said gently, pressing the cup into her hands. She obeyed mechanically, then looked up at him with eyes full of terror. "You don't understand what kind of man he is, Caleb. Harrison doesn't make idle threats. If he says he's coming, he'll come. And he has money, influence, hired men. Her voice broke. "He'll find himself dealing with me," Caleb said, his voice calm but his eyes hard. "And I'm not some city man who can be bought or intimidated." "You don't know him," Emma insisted. "He's ruthless. He's hurt people before who got in his way." "Caleb, I won't let him hurt you because of me." Caleb knelt in front of her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "Look at me, Emma." She did, tears streaming down her face. "You are my wife," Caleb said clearly, "legally, lawfully, and in every way that matters. No man, I don't care how rich or powerful he thinks he is going to come here and take you. Do you understand me?" "But—" "No buts," Caleb interrupted firmly. "You came here running from him, but you're not running anymore. You have a home here. You have a husband. You have a life that's yours, not his. And I will protect that with everything I have." Emma searched his face, looking for doubt or fear. She found only steady determination and something else, a fierce protectiveness that transformed his usual quiet demeanor into something formidable. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "That's all right," Caleb said. Fear is just good sense when facing a real threat. But Emma, listen to me. I've faced down wolves, bears, winter storms that would kill a man in hours. I've survived things that would break most people. This Harrison Blackwood might be powerful in his world, but this is my world. These mountains, this territory, I know every inch of it, and more importantly, I'm not alone. What do you mean? Wet my said and nine. This territory might be wild, but it's not lawless, Caleb explained. We have a community, people who know us, who've welcomed you, Samuel and Martha, Reverend Matthews, the other families scattered through these mountains. They won't take kindly to some eastern man coming here to threaten one of their own. Emma's expression shifted slightly, hope beginning to compete with fear. You think they'd help? I know they would, Caleb said with certainty. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're facing. Tell me everything you know about this man. His habits, his methods, how he operates, everything. Over the next hour, Emma told him. Harrison Blackwood came from old money, the kind that bought politicians and judges. He owned textile mills, had investments in railroads and banks. He was 45 years old, twice widowed. Both wives had died under circumstances that raised questions but never quite led to charges. He's charming in public, Emma explained, her voice steadier now that she was focused on facts rather than fear. That's how he operates. He makes people like him, trust him. Then he uses that trust to get what he wants. With me, he started with gifts and courtship. When I refused his proposal, he turned to pressure through my father. When that didn't work, the threats began. What kind of threats? At first, subtle things. Accidents that weren't quite accidents. My father's business suddenly losing contracts. A fire at the dress shop where I worked. Always with plausible deniability, but the message was clear. Resist him, and the people around me would suffer. Caleb's jaw tightened. I couldn't let others be hurt because of me, Emma said, and I knew that eventually his patience would run out. So I ran. I hoped that the distance would make him lose interest, that he'd find some other woman to fixate on. Men like that don't give up, Caleb said grimly. Their pride won't let them. He sees you as something he's entitled to, something stolen from him. The fact that you chose to leave just makes him more determined. So what do we do? Emma asked. And Caleb heard the we in that question, the way she was trusting him to be her partner in this. First we go to town tomorrow, Caleb said, already planning. We talk to Samuel, get word out to the other families, make sure everyone knows what's coming. Then we talk to Reverend Matthews, make sure our marriage certificate is properly filed and recorded. If Blackwood tries any legal maneuvering, we'll have our documentation in order. And then? Then we prepare, Caleb said simply. We make sure the cabin is secure, we lay in extra supplies in case we need to wait him out, and we make a plan for how to handle him when he arrives. Emma gripped his hands tighter. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. No one's going to get hurt if we're smart about this, Caleb assured her. Emma, this man is used to operating in his world with his rules. Out here, those rules don't apply. Out here, he's just another man, and one who's badly overestimated his position. You really think we can do this? Emma asked. That we can stop him? Caleb pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close. I know we can, because what he doesn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that you can't buy or bully your way through real love, real commitment. He thinks he can just take what he wants. But Emma, you're not a thing to be taken. You're a person who made a choice, and I'm a man who will defend that choice with everything I am. Emma wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. To find you, to have you on my side. I ask myself the same thing every day, Caleb admitted. About you. They stood there for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. When they finally pulled apart, Emma's face held determination alongside the fear. All right, she said. We go to town tomorrow. We prepare. And when when he comes, Caleb finished, he's going to learn that some things are worth fighting for, and some people don't back down, no matter how much money or power you throw at them. That night, they lay together in the darkness, no longer maintaining the careful distance of separate sleeping spaces. Emma curled against Caleb's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. "I won't let him take you," Caleb said into the darkness. "I won't let him take this life we're building." "I know," Emma whispered. "And I won't run again. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Caleb agreed. And as they drifted towards sleep, both of them felt the weight of what was coming. But they also felt something stronger than fear, the certainty that what they'd found together was worth defending, and that together they had the strength to defend it. The letter from Harrison Blackwood lay on the table, its elegant threats a promise of trouble ahead. But beside it sat Emma's recipe book, Caleb's carved bird, and the repaired pocket watch that Samuel had returned just that morning, ticking steadily forward into an uncertain but shared future. Time was moving again, and this time Caleb would fight to keep it moving, to protect the life and love that had finally thawed his frozen heart. The next morning they rode to town, before the sun had fully cleared the peaks. The early light cast long shadows across the trail, and Caleb found himself noting defensive positions, sightlines, places where trouble might come from. 7 years of isolation hadn't erased the instincts he'd developed in his younger years, before he'd come to these mountains seeking peace. Emma was quiet during the ride, but her silence was thoughtful rather than fearful. She sat straight in the saddle, her jaw set with determination. Whatever terror she'd felt the previous day had been tempered overnight into resolve. Caleb felt a surge of pride watching her. This was the woman who'd traveled across the country alone, who'd chosen to hope when despair would have been easier. She was stronger than Blackwood knew. Ironwood was just stirring to life when they arrived. Samuel was sweeping the porch of his store, and his face registered immediate concern when he saw their expressions. "What's happened?" he asked, setting aside his broom. They told him everything inside the store, with Martha present as well. Samuel's face grew darker as the story unfolded, and Martha's expression shifted from shock to protective fury. "That man has no right," Martha declared. "No right at all. Emma's your wife, legal and proper. He can't just—" "He thinks he can," Emma interrupted gently. "And in Philadelphia, with his money and influence, he probably could have. But out here, we take care of our own," Samuel finished firmly. He turned to Caleb. "What do you need from us?" "Information first," Caleb said. "If Blackwood is coming, he'll likely come through here. I need to know when he arrives, how many men he brings, what they're armed with." "I can manage that," Samuel agreed. "I'll put word out to the stage station, the livery, the hotel. If a group of Eastern men arrive asking about you, we'll know." "Second," Caleb continued, "I need to know who else I can count on. If this turns difficult—" "Every family within 20 miles, Martha said immediately. "The Johnsons, the Pratts, the Hendersons, old Tom Whitmore and his boys. The Mackenzie clan up north. You call, and they'll come. You know that." Caleb. He did know it, but hearing it confirmed settled something in him. The isolation he'd chosen all those years ago had been his decision, but it didn't mean the community had abandoned him. They'd been there all along, waiting for him to need them. Reverend Matthews joined them within the hour, summoned by Samuel's son. The Reverend brought with him their marriage certificate and documentation, proving its proper filing with the territorial records. "I took the liberty of making copies," Matthews explained, spreading the papers on Samuel's counter. "One set stays with the territorial office, one set I keep at the church, and these are yours. Even if Blackwood tries to claim the marriage is invalid, we have multiple witnesses and proper documentation. In the eyes of the law, Emma is your wife." Emma picked up one of the certificates, studying the signatures. Hers, Caleb's, the witnesses, the reverend's, proof that she'd made a choice, that she belonged to herself and had freely chosen to share her life with Caleb. "He won't care about the law," Emma said quietly. "Harrison thinks he is the law." "Then he's in for an education," Samuel said grimly. "This territory might be rough around the edges, but we've got order. We've got rights. And we've got people willing to stand up for them." They spent the rest of the morning making plans. Caleb would fortify the cabin, bar the windows, reinforce the door, create defensive positions if needed. Emma would lay in extra supplies and prepare the cabin for possible siege. They'd set up a signaling system with their nearest neighbors, the Johnson family, so they could call for help if needed. Samuel would coordinate with the town, keeping watch for Blackwood's arrival and sending word the moment he appeared. Reverend Matthews would make sure the territorial marshal knew about the situation. The nearest marshal was 3 days' ride away, but a message could be sent. "How long do we have?" Martha asked. "Practical as always." "The letter said within the month," Emma replied. "It's been 2 days since it arrived, and it probably took at least a week to reach us, so perhaps 3 weeks, maybe less." "Plenty of time to prepare," Caleb said with confidence he mostly felt. By midday, half the town knew about the situation. Old Tom Whitmore, a grizzled former Army scout, sought them out specifically. "Heard you might have trouble coming," he said bluntly to Caleb. "My boys and we're ready if you need us. Man tries to take another man's wife against her will. That's not civilized. That's not right." More offers came. The Pratt brothers, both expert shots. James Henderson, who'd been a lawman in Kansas. Even young Billy Carter, Samuel's 17-year-old son, offered to help however he could. "I appreciate it," Caleb told them all. "Truly. But I'm hoping it doesn't come to violence. I'm hoping Blackwood sees reason and turns around." "And if he doesn't?" Tom asked. "Then he'll find out what mountain folk are made of," Caleb replied. The ride back up the mountain was quiet again, but this time the silence held a different quality. They weren't alone in this. They had a community standing with them, ready to defend their right to choose their own lives. Emma leaned back against Caleb as they rode, and he felt her relax incrementally. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For not just accepting this. For fighting for us." She paused. "For being willing to risk yourself for me." "Emma," Caleb said, pulling the horse to a stop. He waited until she turned to look at him. "You're not just someone I'm protecting out of duty. You're my wife. You're the woman who brought my life back to me when I thought it was over. There's nothing I wouldn't risk for you." She kissed him then, there on the mountain trail with the sun filtering through the pines, and Caleb felt the truth of his words settle into his bones. He'd spent 7 years believing he was better off alone, that caring for someone was too dangerous, too painful. But Emma had shown him that the real danger was in not caring, in not living fully because you were afraid of losing. Back at the cabin, they worked together to prepare. Caleb reinforced the door and shutters, adding bars that could be dropped into place from inside. He checked his rifle and his father's old revolver, making sure both were clean and loaded. He stacked firewood inside, ensuring they wouldn't have to go outside if they needed to wait out trouble. Emma organized their supplies, taking inventory of food, water, and medical necessities. She filled every container they had with fresh water from the creek. She prepared meals that could be easily reheated, storing them where they'd be accessible. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, her fear channeled into productive action. In the evenings, they talked strategy. Caleb taught Emma to shoot, though she'd had some experience already. He showed her how to reload quickly, how to aim properly, how to stay calm under pressure. She proved to be a quick learner, and Caleb felt grateful for her steady hands and clear mind. "I never thought I'd need to know this," Emma said one evening, sighting down the rifle barrel at a target Caleb had set up. "Hope you never do need it," Caleb replied. "But better to know and not need than the opposite." Emma lowered the rifle and turned to him. Do you think he'll really come? Or was the letter just meant to frighten me into running again? Hard to say, Caleb admitted. Men like him, their pride gets wounded when they don't get their way. The letter could be posturing, or it could be a genuine threat. We prepare either way. And if he does come, Caleb considered the question carefully. Then we stand our ground. We show him the documentation proving our marriage is legal. We let him know that the community supports us. We give him every chance to leave peacefully. And if he won't leave, then we make it clear that he's not welcome and that trying to force the issue will end badly for him. I won't start violence, Emma, but I will finish it if he forces my hand. Emma nodded slowly. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. This isn't because of you, Caleb corrected gently. This is because of him. Because he can't accept that you have the right to make your own choices. That's on him, not you. They established routines in the following days, balancing preparation with maintaining their normal life. Emma continued tending her garden, though Caleb now kept his rifle nearby when they worked outside. They continued their evening routine of sitting by the fire, though they were more alert to sounds from outside. They continued building their life together, refusing to let fear of what might come destroy what they had. The Johnson family, their nearest neighbors 3 miles away, came by one afternoon. Ben Johnson was a solid man in his 50s. His wife Sarah, warm and practical like Martha Carter. They brought supplies and moral support. We've set up a signal, Ben explained, showing them a mirror that could flash in sunlight. You see trouble, you signal us. We'll come running, and we'll bring the boys. The boys in question were Ben's 3 grown sons, all capable men. We appreciate it, Caleb said. That's what neighbors are for, Sarah said firmly. She turned to Emma. You're one of us now, dear. We protect our own. After they left, Emma stood at the window looking out at the mountains. I never had this, she said quietly. Back in Philadelphia, everyone was so isolated, so focused on their own concerns. Here, people actually care about each other. That's how it has to be out here, Caleb explained. The land is hard, the winters are harsh. You help each other or you don't survive. It makes for strong bonds. I like it, Emma said. I like belonging somewhere, being part of something larger than just myself. You belong here, Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. With me, with this place, with these people. You belong here, Emma. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Yes, she agreed. I do. The days passed. 1 week, 2 weeks. No word came from town about Blackwood's arrival. The tension began to ease slightly, though they remained vigilant. Maybe the letter had been just a threat. Maybe Blackwood had reconsidered. Maybe. Then, 3 weeks to the day after the letter arrived, Samuel's son Billy came riding hard up the mountain trail. He's here, Billy gasped as Caleb and Emma met him outside the cabin. Harrison Blackwood arrived this morning with 4 men. They're asking questions in town, making inquiries. Father sent me to warn you. They're planning to ride up here tomorrow at first light. Emma's face went pale, but her voice was steady. How did he seem? Reasonable? Angry? Cold, Billy said. Like he already knows how this is going to end, and he's just going through the motions. Made my skin crawl, the way he smiled when he asked about you. Caleb's jaw tightened. Go back and tell your father we're ready. Tell him we'll handle it peacefully if we can, but we won't be backing down. Billy nodded and rode back down the trail at a gallop. Emma turned to Caleb, her eyes meeting his with steel in them. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow, Caleb agreed. He took her face in his hands. No matter what happens, Emma, remember this. You're not alone. You're not powerless. And you're not running. No, Emma said firmly. I'm not running. Not anymore. They spent that evening in preparation and quiet conversation, taking strength from each other, ready to face whatever the morning would bring. And as night fell over the mountains, Caleb held his wife close and made a silent promise that whatever happened tomorrow, Emma would remain free to choose her own life, her own love, her own future. Harrison Blackwood was about to learn that some things cannot be bought and some people cannot be broken. Blackwood's men shifted nervously, their hands moving away from their weapons as they realized they were surrounded. The odds had shifted dramatically, and even hired guns knew when they were beaten. "This is outrageous," Blackwood sputtered, his composure cracking. "You can't, this is kidnapping, coercion." "No," Emma said, stepping fully out of the cabin to stand beside Caleb. Her voice rang clear across the clearing. "This is what community looks like. This is what it means when people stand together for what's right." She walked forward, and Caleb started to follow, but she held up a hand. "No, this is mine to say." Emma approached Blackwood, stopping a safe distance away. The morning sun caught in her hair, and Caleb had never seen her look more beautiful or more fierce. "I want you to hear this clearly, Harrison," Emma said. "I am not your fiancé. I never was, because I never accepted your proposal. I am Emma Stone, wife to Caleb Stone, resident of Wyoming Territory. I made that choice freely, and I stand by it." "You don't know what you're saying," Blackwood insisted, though his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "You're confused, influenced by these people." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Emma interrupted. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I want. And it's not you. It was never you. You don't love me, Harrison. You want to own me. There's a difference." "I can give you everything." Blackwood's voice rose, genuine emotion breaking through his controlled facade. "Position, wealth, respect." "I have respect," Emma said quietly. "These people respect me. Caleb respects me. They see me as a person with my own thoughts and choices. You see me as an object to acquire. That's not love. That's possession." Blackwood's face darkened with rage. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you're giving up? What you're throwing away for this wilderness and this nobody?" "He's not a nobody," Emma said, and her voice carried such conviction that even Blackwood seemed taken aback. "He's my husband. He's a good man who's built a life through honest work and determination. He's brave enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be gentle, and wise enough to know that real strength isn't about controlling others, it's about standing beside them." She took another step forward, and Blackwood actually stepped back. "I tried to be kind about refusing you," Emma continued. "I tried to be clear and gentle, hoping you'd understand and move on, but you wouldn't accept no. You used my father's debts to try to force my hand. You threatened people I cared about. You made me so afraid that I fled across the country, and even then, you couldn't let me go. You had to follow, had to try to reclaim what you thought was yours." "Everything I did was because I love you," Blackwood said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "No," Emma said firmly. "Love doesn't threaten. Love doesn't coerce. Love doesn't hunt someone down who's made it clear they want to be left alone. What you feel isn't love, Harrison. It's obsession. It's the rage of a man who can't stand to be told no." The gathered men stood silent, witnesses to this confrontation. Even Blackwood's hired men seemed uncomfortable, their eyes shifting away from their employer. "I'm giving you a choice now," Emma said, her voice steady and clear. "The same choice you never gave me. You can leave peacefully, accept that I've made my decision, and return to your life in Philadelphia. Or you can force this further and find out what happens when you threaten someone these people have claimed as their own. You'd really choose this?" Blackwood gestured at the cabin, at the rough mountain surroundings. "Poverty and hardship over everything I could give you?" "It's not poverty when you're rich in things that matter," Emma replied. "And it's not hardship when you're facing it with someone who values you. Yes, Harrison, I choose this. I choose him. I choose this life, and nothing you say or do will change that." The silence that followed was profound. Blackwood stared at Emma as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Whatever he saw made him flinch. "You'll regret this," he said finally. But the threat had no weight. He sounded defeated. "No," Emma said with absolute certainty. "The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner, not trusting that I had the right to say no and have it respected." Reverend Matthews stepped forward from the group of townsmen, holding up the marriage certificate. "This union is legal and binding, Mr. Blackwood, witnessed, filed, and recognized by territorial law. Any attempt to interfere with it would be a criminal offense. I suggest you accept that and move on." Blackwood looked around at the armed men, at Emma's resolute face, at Caleb's protective stance. His shoulders sagged slightly, the first genuine emotion other than anger showing through. "I loved you," he said to Emma, and for a moment he almost sounded sincere. "No," Emma said gently. "You loved the idea of owning me, but I'm not something to be owned. I never was." Blackwood turned to his horse, his movements stiff with wounded pride. His hired men followed, relief evident in their postures. "This isn't over," Blackwood said as he mounted. "Yes," Caleb spoke for the first time in minutes, his voice carrying quiet authority. "It is. You're going to leave now. You're going to go back to Pennsylvania. And you're going to stay there. Because if you ever come back here, if you ever threaten my wife again, you'll find out what mountain justice looks like. And I promise you, it won't be gentle." The threat was delivered calmly, but something in Caleb's eyes made Blackwood pale slightly. "Leave now," Caleb continued, "while you still can with dignity intact." Blackwood stared at him for a long moment, then jerked his horse's head around. Without another word, he and his men rode down the mountain trail. They watched until the group disappeared from sight, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Only then did the gathered men lower their rifles and begin to talk among themselves, tension releasing into relieved conversation. Emma turned to Caleb, and he saw tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," Caleb confirmed, pulling her into his arms. Around them, their friends and neighbors celebrated the victory, but Caleb and Emma only had eyes for each other. She'd found her voice, claimed her power, stood up for herself in a way that transformed her completely. And Caleb had stood beside her, supporting but not overshadowing, strong but not controlling. This was what partnership looked like. This was what love looked like. And it was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability that had led them here. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. Martha Carter had somehow anticipated the need and brought food enough to feed the gathered crowd. Tables were set up in the clearing, and what had begun as a potential confrontation transformed into an impromptu community gathering. Emma moved among their friends and neighbors, thanking each one personally for standing with them. Her face glowed with gratitude and relief, and Caleb watched her with pride. This woman who'd arrived 3 months ago as a frightened stranger was now fully part of this community, embraced and valued by everyone present. "She's something special, your wife," Tom Whitmore said, appearing at Caleb's elbow with a cup of coffee. "Takes courage to stand up to a man like that." "She's stronger than she knows," Caleb agreed. "So are you," Tom observed. "You let her fight her own battle. Lot of men would have tried to fight it for her." Caleb considered that. She needed to do it herself. To prove to herself that she could, I was just there to make sure it stayed fair. "That's partnership," Tom said with approval. "That's how it should be." By late afternoon, their friends began to depart, heading back to their own homes and responsibilities. Samuel was the last to leave, pausing at his wagon to speak to Caleb privately. "We'll keep watch for a while," Samuel said. "Make sure Blackwood really leaves the territory. But I think you saw the last of him. Man like that, having his pride wounded publicly, he won't risk coming back." "I appreciate everything you did," Caleb said, gripping Samuel's hand. "All of you! I don't know how to repay it." "Don't need repayment," Samuel said firmly. That's what community means. You'd do the same for any of us." He paused, then added, "It's good to see you back among the living, Caleb. Emma did that. She brought you back to us." After everyone had gone, Caleb and Emma stood in the clearing, surveying the remnants of the impromptu celebration. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I can't believe it's really over," Emma said quietly. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked. Emma thought about it for a long moment. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free. Not running, not hiding, not afraid, just free." Caleb pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You were magnificent today. The way you stood up to him, the things you said, Emma, you were incredible." "I couldn't have done it without you," Emma said, "without knowing you were there, that I wasn't alone. That made all the difference." They stood there, as the sun sank lower, comfortable in the silence, in each other's presence. Finally, Emma stirred. "There's something I want to show you," she said, taking his hand and leading him inside the cabin. From beneath their bed, she pulled out a small wooden box he'd never seen before. She opened it carefully, revealing its contents, the letters they'd exchanged before meeting, tied with twine. The carved bird he'd made for her, a pressed wildflower from that first day, other small mementos of their time together. And there, nestled at the bottom, was the pocket watch. "When did you?" Caleb began. "I've been keeping things," Emma explained. "Moments that mattered, things I wanted to remember." She lifted out the watch, and Caleb saw that it was running, the second hand moving smoothly around the face. "Samuel returned it while you were talking to Tom. I wanted to save it for the right moment." She placed the watch in Caleb's hand. It was warm from where she'd held it, and the steady tick-tick-tick felt like a heartbeat. "Time moves forward now," Emma said softly. "For both of us. No more being frozen in past pain, no more letting fear stop us from living." Caleb opened the watch, seeing the inscription his father had put there years ago. "To my son, may you always find your way home." He'd read those words countless times, but tonight they meant something new. He had found his way home. Not to a place, but to a person, to the life they were building together. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Emma smiled and produced one more item from the box, a piece of paper. "I wrote something new," she said, handing it to him, "a different kind of letter." Caleb unfolded it and read, "My dearest Caleb, when I answered your advertisement, I thought I was seeking shelter and safety. I thought I was making a practical arrangement to escape an impossible situation. I had no idea I was actually finding home. You asked for honesty in your letters, and I tried to give it. But I couldn't be fully honest because I didn't yet know the truth myself. I didn't know that a loveless arrangement could become the deepest love. I didn't know that a stranger could become the other half of my soul. I didn't know that in seeking shelter, I would find purpose. These months with you have transformed me. You've taught me that strength isn't about walls, it's about having the courage to be vulnerable. That safety isn't about isolation, it's about having someone to face the dangers with. That home isn't a place, it's the feeling of being fully known and fully loved. I came to these mountains running from something. I'm staying because I found everything I never knew I needed. Thank you for lifting that veil. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me see you. All my love, always and forever, Emma." Caleb read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the box with the other letters. When he looked at Emma, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said simply. 3 words he hadn't spoken in 8 years, 3 words he'd thought he'd never say again. "I love you too," Emma replied, and kissed him. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and stars began to emerge. The mountains stood eternal, unchanged by human drama, continuing their patient vigil over the valley. But inside the cabin, 2 lonely people had found each other through carefully worded letters and desperate hope. They'd built something real from a practical arrangement, something lasting from a loveless plan. The pocket watch ticked steadily on the table, marking time moving forward. Emma's garden would bloom in the spring. The community they'd joined would continue to grow and thrive. And Caleb and Emma Stone would face whatever came next together, two people who'd learned that the bravest thing you can do is choose to hope. Sometimes the loneliest man is the one who's convinced himself he doesn't need anyone at all. But Caleb Stone had learned differently. He'd learned that needing someone isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That letting someone in isn't dangerous, it's the only way to truly live. And as he held his wife close, listening to the mountain wind sing through the pines, Caleb understood that the best arrangements are the ones where love sneaks in, uninvited, and transforms everything, where practical plans give way to impractical joy, and where two careful hearts learn to beat as one. The mountain man had expected a loveless marriage. His bride had arrived and changed everything forever. And in the end, that change was the greatest gift either of them could have received.